How many patches before JHIN gets nerfed? Is JHIN the guy right now after all the 80 carry nerfs? Is JHIN him? Is it Jimothy? It looks like he might be the guy right now after all the 80 carry nerfs. I'm not surprised that characters like JHIN and Misfortune are like showing up on top when, like, you know, it's harder to spike early as an 80 carry after, like, you know, a number of our changes to their items and systems. I would expect lane bullies to come on top. I'm curious if, like, Draven is really strong on high elos. And it's still a bunch of Kaisa up there. And so, like, it's not surprising to me that JHIN is this popular. That said, 25% pick rate is very, very popular, so I could definitely see this guy being a bit strong. I will note that win rate is not generally a good way to evaluate if JHIN is strong. You might look at this win rate and be like, oh, JHIN's broken, clearly. Look at how high his win rate is. But JHIN historically has always sat around 51, 52% win rate. That's like not an unreasonable win rate for him. He's a lot like Misfortune, where it's like, because he can't dash around like Ezreal and Kaisa, he tends to need to chill a bit higher. Not saying he's balanced, want to be very clear. But just saying, like, if I was to look at JHIN and be like, he might need a nerf, it would actually be a lot to do with his popularity. It's kind of a thing where there's certain 80 carries where when they get beyond a certain bar of popularity, it's no longer because they're fun, it's because they're meta and you should pick them every game. Characters like JHIN can run into this. Characters like Kaisa run into this. Ezreal does not run into this. Ezreal is just always, for the history of forever, giga popular, and so if you see him at the top of the popularity charts really, really high, it's probably just because he's fun. Doesn't mean he can't be OP sometimes. But yeah, so looking at that, if JHIN is like one of the most played 80 carries in the game, I'd be like, probably a little strong. He could very well maybe need a nerf. The question there is like, okay, well, you know, are there any other characters that need nerfs on there? Like, should we nerf Ezreal? Should we nerf Kaisa? Are there any characters up there that should be buffed? Like, should we buff Jinx? Should we buff Aphelios? Right? Like, stuff like that. But, yeah. Overall, I'm not surprised that JHIN is a dominant 80 carry right now after a lot of the 80 carry systemic nerfs. And, yeah, I could easily see a future where he gets a little bop. But mainly, like, I would look at that in terms of popularity and meta-definingness of him. Like, do you pick him every game? Is he blind pickable? Is he just good into all situations? Versus necessarily being like, his win rate is high, he should be nerfed, because he generally sits at high win rates even when he's like not as popular. And JHIN is very much a character that if he had a 50% win rate, he'd legitimately be pretty weak. He's more like a Misfortune who tends to need to sit around 51, 52 to be viable. But again, probably he's pretty good right now, given how popular he is. My personal take is, my guess is that JHIN and Kaisa are fairly strong right now, and some of the other 80 carries after the adjustments that we did to their items might need some help. Characters like Jinx, Aphelios, stuff like that, but, you know, I'm not as in the loop. At what point, pick rate-wise, does it catch your eye? Maybe we should nerf or do something about this. I think in pick rate-wise, when it's often when the character is, like, far beyond other characters in terms of pick rate, especially in high MMR. And so it's kind of the idea that high MMR players are known to pick for power. They're not as fun-loving as you might think. They tend to pick for power. Not all of them, but a lot more of them. Whereas silver players tend to just pick what they enjoy. And so a popular character in silver is a character's popularity is some combination of fun and power. You could abstract it to that. Viability, meta-ness, and how enjoyable they are to play, and how cool they look, things like that. And so what you don't want to do is nerf a character for being fun. That would be bad. Like, you shouldn't just go look at a character and be like, they have a pick rate that's above 10%, and we should nerf them until it's 10%, because no character should have a high pick rate. That's bad, because what it does is it just punishes characters people enjoy. The nature of a game like League of Legends is some characters will be more popular than others, right? So that's the danger. The flip side of it, though, is a lot of players are picking people for power. And when a character's pick rate is really high because they're powerful, that's often an indication of like, maybe there's something we should do there to nerf them. And so, in terms of the allocation, fun and power, low MMR looks a lot more like this, where you're picking a lot for fun and not nearly as much for power. Whereas higher MMR looks more like this, where you're picking a lot for power and not nearly as much for fun. But again, both are still present. And so one of the indications to me that a character's pick rate might be, you know, in Scary Town, if it's a combination of if it's really high and high MMR, and not nearly as high and low MMR. So actually, let's go investigate JHIN right now, see if this is the case. So JHIN right now, his pick rate is 25% in low MMR and 30% in high MMR. That honestly isn't that much of a difference. That's not too scary. Now that said, let's compare this JHIN. You'll notice he had this pick rate spike over here to this JHIN. This JHIN was picked 19% in low MMR and 14% in high MMR. That's a pretty good indication here that a lot of these, this character wasn't super good in the meta. Not saying he was weak. Again, not saying JHIN was bad. People are gonna be like, August says JHIN sucks, he's so biased, right? But it's kind of like indicating that if you were the best players in the game, you were probably not picking JHIN as much because there were other more powerful things you could pick. Whereas, you know, a lot of silver and platinum players are just picking JHIN for fun. That's what this kind of like win rate difference looks like. Whereas you notice now, JHIN's gaining a lot more pick rate and higher MMRs compared to lower MMR. So that's starting to indicate more that a lot of high MMR players are picking JHIN for power as opposed to picking him because, you know, he's enjoyable to play. Kai'Sa's a character who is often like this, where Kai'Sa tends to have, you know, a significantly higher pick rate in high MMR. That's not the case right now, but like look at this patch here. This patch, Kai'Sa was a 36% pick rate in high MMR and only like 23 in low. Like that's like significantly higher in high, and I think that's an indication during this patch that one of the reasons Kai'Sa was so popular is that she was legitimately just strong, regardless what her win rate was. Because high MMR players are looking at her and being like, well, I should just pick this character. She's good, regardless of situation. So again, that's one of the things I tend to think about in regards to like thinking about pick rate. One of the you'll see this with Jinx sometimes. Most metas, Jinx's pick rate is the same or lower in high MMR than it is in low. But every once in a while, when Jhin gets super strong, her pick rate will explode in Diamond. And that almost always is an indication that she's overpowered, regardless of what her win rate is. Because when Jinx is balanced, because of her kit, she's not a very high agency character, right? She kind of just dies to things. But when Jinx is truly balanced because of her kit, she tends not to be picked significantly more in Challenger. Doesn't mean she's not popular up there. Again, I want to like make the difference between popular and picked way more in Diamond than in Silver, right? And so oftentimes when Jinx is strong, and people are like, yo, is Jinx is strong? One of the things I'll look at to like get an understanding for myself of Jinx is like, are Diamond players picking her way more? And if the answer is yes, the initial thing I'll think is like, oh, that probably means she's kind of strong and might need a nerf. Versus if Diamond players aren't picking Jinx as much, probably means she's a lot closer to balanced, regardless of how popular she is. So yeah, popularity is tough though. It's definitely an imprecise science. It's definitely like, there's a lot of subjectiveness to it, because you can't just nerf popular characters. Because again, you don't want to punish characters for being popular. But you can think about popularity in terms of how much of this play rate is coming from the character being powerful, as opposed to just, you know, being a popular character that people want to play. What was the reason for moving Senna's lethality and putting it into AP? One of the reasons to pro play, but the other is, what's the other reason? The other reason is Phreak wanted to move her more towards just a larger scope of AD items. So things like Black Cleaver make more sense when the AD ratio on the heal is stronger. Things like, honestly, a lot of the crit items make a lot more sense when the AD ratio on the heal is a lot stronger. And so Phreak wanted to move her more towards the grander scope of AD items as opposed to like making her spike really, really hard with lethality in ways that maybe were more pro skewed. Again, I do wonder if long term, like, she might need an AP ratio not an AP, but an AD ratio adjustment, but those are the reasons. We added the lethality ratio years ago to give us tuning levers to like get her on to lethality. This was during a time when she built a lot of tank. And so it's kind of like, well, hey, if we don't want this character building tank, we should give her a lethality ratio, because then like we can really ensure she builds these like AD lethality items, which are very much not tank. And so that's how it got there. I think that's a totally reasonable thing. So Phreak wanted to try moving back and moving her more towards some of those like AD items across the system that have a bit more supportive outputs. Like one of the reasonings here is like items like Black Cleaver actually have a lot more supportive outputs than a lot of the lethality assassin items. And one of the overall goals of that list was making Senna more supportive and less like as a replacement for an AD carry, which is one of the reasons she's so dominant in Pro, is you can take her as an AD carry replacement. And so the intent was being like, yes, she's an AD carry support. Yes, that's important. And one of the ways to make her better with other marksmen is to make her less of a replacement for them and more of a augment to them. And one of the ways you make a support a good augment to other marksmen is by increasing your utility. So you'll notice Phreak did things like increase the root duration in that change list. And another thing he did was make her better with Black Cleaver, which, by the way, is really, really good if you are paired with a marksman. Because Senna's like, yo, dog, I'll shred them, and then you kill them, right? And so, like, Phreak's goal with that change list was to make her a bit more supportive, so she synergizes a bit better with other AD carries as opposed to trying to replace other AD carries.